The thing about the welfare state is that when you start on this route, everything goes fine. Now, Social Security is a case, as you may know, and it's one of the most extreme cases of misleading advertising that I know of. It's not social, and it's not security.
Hey guys, I've been obsessed with a dead person recently. His name's Milton Friedman, and he's a clear blueprint for the propaganda strategies we see recycled over and over today. He was quite the content creator back in his day, and I've been consuming a bunch of his lectures and talks as research for this upcoming big video that I'm working on about that poster back there. But there's way too much Friedman content in the world to fit in that video. So I figured we'd do a little reaction on the fly to one of his greatest hits.
Dr. Milton Friedman, a scientist, a careful thinker, and a great teacher, first presented his TV series, Free to Choose. His TV series was about choices, risks, freedom, equality, and making a better future for all of us.
I think the only Friedman lore you need to know beforehand, if you're not familiar with him, is that he's sort of seen as a god in a lot of right-wing, particularly libertarian circles. Very lauded, won lots of awards. His influence, truly can't be overstated. The main thing he's known for is building a bunch of anti-government sentiment in the 60s and 70s that would culminate in the abject failure of trickle-down economics. But he's still celebrated. So, today we're watching a lecture he gave at a university called "What is Wrong with the Welfare State?" Friedman speaks.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm glad to be here tonight. I must say I am strongly tempted after the title, "What's Wrong with the Welfare State?" with a question mark, to say nothing and turn around and walk off the stage. That would make it easier on all of us. But I learned long ago that it was good policy to be honest.
Let's get started. He kicks off the discussion with a pretty compelling premise.
What I want to talk about tonight, why it is that the noble objectives which have animated the growth of the welfare state have produced results that disappoint almost everybody.
Questionable, but let's let him cook. He introduces the topic by sharing his perception of the history of welfare, starting with a book written in Great Britain by wealthy aristocrats.
Their whole attitude was, after all, some people know better than other people what's good for people. We are among the elite. We know what's good for the ordinary man. We don't want to force it down his throat, but we believe that in a properly structured society, he would recognize that we do know better, and it is in many ways the basic motivating force on a moral and ethical level behind the movement for the welfare state. The fundamental driving force is paternalism. It's an attempt to do good for other people.
Then he does another name drop.
Now, interestingly enough, the other source of the modern welfare state comes from a very different yet not wholly unrelated tradition. It comes from Bismarck's Germany. And it was the first modern state which introduced on a fairly large scale the kind of welfare measures that have become common in most societies in the modern day.
The title of the lecture, What's Wrong with the Welfare State, is posed as an exploratory question, right? And he also tries to bring everyone's guard down at the beginning by, saying, we all hate this, right? So let's just fix it together. Already, this early on, by saying he's sharing the history of welfare, the origins, I think is intellectual dishonesty. Like, that topic is a mess, and everyone is gonna have their own starting point. I guess that's fine, but he's so light on the details that he's not actually teaching anyone history. He's just pointing at boogeymen, reminding people of things they hate to connect it with welfare. You're not actually talking about the history. You're not talking about any of the first policies that were enacted. You're not talking about what the goals of the people were. Anyway, that's all we get on that topic anyway, because then he shifts to present day countries with welfare.
Now, the interesting thing is that in every case, the welfare states are in trouble. The United Kingdom has obviously been having great difficulties, social, economic, political. For a while, everybody was saying, but there's Sweden. But now Sweden is in trouble. It is having great difficulties. Denmark is in trouble. The United States, as we have moved farther and farther down the road, we have had more and more dissatisfaction with what has occurred.
I'm going to keep an ear out now for any connection to welfare, right? He's listing a bunch of places saying that they're bad and that they have welfare, but I'm looking for that link.
In the case of the United Kingdom, it is tempting to attribute the problems of the United Kingdom, and many British have done so, to the consequences of World War I and World War II. To say that World War I decimated a whole of a young generation that would have provided the leadership for Britain. In World War II, destroyed its economic capacity. And yet, in a great book that was first published in 1899 and of which a revised edition was published in 1913, A.V. Dicey, a famous constitutional lawyer, outlined what was going to happen in Britain in coming decades.
Like what? Give example, please. He doesn't even say the name of the book. He just says, smart guy from the past wrote a thing, and he was right, so you should go read the summary. It's like, dude, I'm at your lecture.
He dated the turn in Britain back in the 1880s and 1890s, the turn from individualism to collectivism. There is nothing that has happened from that day to this that was not pretty clearly foreshadowed, so that it wasn't the war. In any event, Sweden...
Okay, I think I'm following. So collectivism bad, and bad things will happen. Now those things did happen, and we also, they have welfare. Shit. In any event, Sweden
is decisive evidence, because if it was the war that caused the problems in the UK, Sweden stayed out of both wars and indeed profited enormously on an economic level from them, and you certainly cannot blame the problems that have been arising in Sweden on the war.
Oh, Sweden just got slammed. What are we talking about?
The thing about the welfare state is that when you start on this route, everything goes fine. To begin with, you are imposing taxes on 90% of the people, small taxes, and are able to give considerable benefits to 10% of the people. But the problem is that as time goes on, more and more people come in and either express a desire or are given a chance at a part of the proceeds. So you gradually get to the position where 50% of the people are providing benefits to other 50% of the people, and then you ultimately get to the position where 100% of the people are paying taxes in order to provide benefits to 100% of the people.
Okay, two things. First, glad we're getting somewhere substantive. Second, great numbers go big or small argument. Dude, very effective. This is really silly. He's trying to assert that over time, a natural consequence of welfare is that more and more people will get on it. And that is true to some extent, right? Like, it started in the 30s with a much smaller scope, just widows and the elderly, what have you. And over time, it expanded, right? It started to include people who are unemployed. Obviously, after the Civil Rights Act, it became a lot harder to discriminate against racial minorities. But, like, that line doesn't keep going up forever. It's not that more groups were added arbitrarily. They were people in need who were missed in the first place. What he's saying reminds me of how, when those graphs would come out as public acceptance of being gay was like more common, more people would identify as being gay, and it's like, oh no, is everyone gonna become gay? No. So now we shift into the next part, where he starts explaining why he thinks welfare programs run specifically by the government are bad.
The question remains, however, what goes wrong? Why is it that such noble objectives lead to such disappointing results? After all, the objective of promoting the welfare of the ordinary man, of eliminating poverty and disease, providing security for old age and against mishaps of fortune, those are noble objectives. In my opinion, the fundamental answer is very simple. Using government to achieve these objectives means trying to do good with someone else's money. Nobody spends somebody else's money as carefully as he spends his own. And therefore, you are going to have waste and ultimately fiscal catastrophe.
Okay, so you're telling me that people are less careful when spending other people's money. Is that why all those billionaires are like building underground bunkers in Hawaii? Because they're using money they stole from underpaying their workers? Oh, my bad. He's talking about welfare benefits. Yeah, that is their money. You don't give someone something and then still get to say that it's yours, right? But maybe we'd be better off if we made a stronger effort to empower people with their money instead of constantly reminding them that there are strings attached and that it can be taken away at any moment. Okay, as far as I can tell, this right here is his real prevailing argument.
Sending a policeman around to pick somebody else's pocket is at the very heart of the welfare state. If the government spends money on it, somebody else has less money to spend. The government has been spending more money on these problems, but more money has not been spent on these problems. Because the government can get money to spend only by taking it away from somebody else.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, he acts like this is a logic bomb or something, but it's not a secret how welfare works. It does attempt to swing the pendulum back in favor of the everyday person against broken systems designed to advantage the ultra-wealthy. He spends the next big chunk talking about New York City as like a failed state and welfare is the cause but it's really devoid of context, and, I'm not an expert on 1970s New York.
But given the great burst of sympathy for New York from the rest of the country, those missions to Washington were not uniformly successful.
What I am an expert in is joke telling. And massive L here, Milton. Punchlines are supposed to go at the end, my man.
New York is bankrupt. Whether it calls itself bankrupt or not is largely irrelevant.
Okay, now we have another shift. He's going to the freedom argument. Watch this.
But a second consequence is a loss of freedom. If you use force to effectuate objects, good or bad, there is going to be a loss of freedom. If we assign to others the task of taking care of us, we cannot retain our freedom to pursue our own lives as we would.
Yeah, he's missing the mark here too. And ironically, if he did go through the history of welfare, he would have found out that it doesn't actually take care of people in the holistic sense he's pointing to. Outside of new programs, even when spending on welfare increases because new babies are born, that doesn't mean that the value remains the same, right? Because didn't keep up with inflation, especially by the time of his lecture. And it's even worse today. There are plenty of states who have gone over 30 years without adjusting the value of welfare provided to people for a long time, right? Especially as those additional groups got brought in, welfare moved away from being subsidized income. It was a supplement, right? That's why so many people on welfare are still working. Anyway, watch this.
People who call themselves liberals, although that is a term I do not myself wish to apply to them, I am a liberal. I believe in freedom. Liberalism means of and belonging to freedom, pertaining to freedom. Those people who now call themselves liberals have misappropriated the term because for them it simply means that they are liberal with other people's money.
You were so close. You got the punchline thing right, but you forgot it was supposed to be funny. And it was a bit too drawn out. So then I'm kind of blindsided because he starts talking about public housing being a failure.
In every city and state of the country, public housing units have become a source of crime and indigence. They have done harm.
We'll get back to that one soon, but I want to take a step back for a second because I have no idea how coherent this video is going to be. The lecture itself is really hard to follow in a straight line. And I can't pay attention to things mostly, but I've watched this 4 or 5 times. Maybe part of it is just the way he talks with 4 pauses embedded in every sentence. But also, we've jumped around so many countries, so many people who have written things, pointing at bad, saying welfare is related somehow, but it never goes past that observation. And he still hasn't defined what the welfare state is. And maybe that's something lost to the context of time, I guess, giving him the benefit of the doubt. But there are so many different definitions you could apply to welfare and welfare state. So far, I think he's only referenced programs where the government spends money to help poor people. But, welfare is more than that. It's anything that it does to make everyday life better. And it includes healthcare and education programs as well. And even beyond that, it includes things that don't have a cost, like equal rights laws, fair labor standards. Is he against those? He makes way too many sweeping generalizations for me to not ask this question, right? It's not fair for us to not know what he's talking about when he keeps saying, well, everyone hates the welfare state. It's like 10 different people could be thinking of different things, and he leverages that ambiguity to get you on his side. That's dishonest. Okay, back to public housing. He was telling an anecdote about a guy who said public housing was the worst thing ever.
Well, what he said is right. Wherever it's been used, public housing has been a disaster. But if you ask the proponents of it, people who have been proponents of it in the past, they will agree. But then they will say, but that's because we didn't do it right. We ought to spend more money on it. We ought to have scattered public housing instead of concentrated. Or we ought to have this, that, or the other thing.
Glad he got more laughs. Definitely getting more comfortable with the crowd. But, how do you think programs are improved, my guy? You try something, doesn't work, you change it up. Our country has been doing more scattered site programs recently, and there are a lot of benefits to it. We also still do place-based, and there's a lot of benefits to that too. They're different, but neither are going to work if they're not adequately funded. That's just common sense, right? But that's the story of welfare. Okay. He's gonna drop a bomb now.
Doesn't the time come when we have to say, it's not the particular program, it's the system that's wrong? Well, why is the system wrong? Fundamentally, it's because the laws of the market work as well in the political arena as they work in the economic arena.
Okay, so now he's on a new line of comparing the government to the free market.
And we say, of course, we will treat people in the market as pursuing their own interest. The worker will try to get the highest wage, the consumer will try to get the lowest price, the employer will try to get the best deal, the producer will try to make the most profit. But then when we come to the political arena, we tend to look at it a little differently. We tend to say, well, now let's figure out what would be the right thing to do from the social point of view. Let's persuade our fellows to vote for it, and once we've voted for it, we'll have the results we want. But surely, we have to look at it from a different point of view. We have to say the people who are in the political arena are also people. They are also trying to do what's best for themselves. The bureaucrats, I don't mean that in any invidious way. I'll come and become more invidious about them later, but at the moment I don't want to start that way. So, if we're going to analyze the political arena, we have to look at that as a different kind of a market in which there is also competition. If the government is going to distribute $1 million for whatever program, no matter how, it will pay people to spend up to $100 million to get it to go to them instead of somebody else. If goodies are going to be distributed, well, then you better go out and try to get your share of the goodies. In this competitive game, who are the most efficient competitors? Is it the poor suckers at the bottom who haven't got any money?
Whoa. Okay, there have been a lot of fake outs so far during this lecture, but I think we actually might agree on this one. I mean, I wouldn't call them poor suckers, but
those people who have not had the qualities which enable them to succeed in the economic arena are not likely to have the qualities that will enable them to succeed in the political arena.
No, Milton, individual qualities. What happened to talking about the systemic issues, the structure? Okay, but what he was talking about is a problem and still continues to be, probably more than ever. In the YouTube comments, everyone is saying he's a prophet, and I'm just gonna assume that this specifically is what they're talking about. I hope so, at least. Welfare dollars are misused a lot, and that's because some people have better connections, more resources. So They can bend the rules a little to improperly get access to them. That's how we got the whole Brett Favre volleyball court situation. So I get where he's coming from, or I see why he's bringing it up, at least, but isn't the difference between government and the free market that the government can actually impose regulations to counteract activities like this from happening, or put rules in place so that it can't occur?
There has been the great fear over the centuries of democracy on the ground that the have-nots would get together against the haves, that the bottom 51% would get together in a majority rule and despoil the top 49%. You want to leave out the bottom 44% because, first of all, they're likely to be more easily duped with respect to providing them with your votes.
Oof.
We talk about being guided by majority rule, but we're not. And yet we are. We are controlled, we are run in a political system, you are run by a majority.
I don't even know what we're talking about anymore. It has kind of turned to old man yells at cloud. So here he goes on rambling for a really long time about voter coalitions and the Department of Energy for some reason, and it's not clear what the link is to welfare. My only assumption is that he's doing this to equate it with, yucky government bureaucracy and yucky politics.
Let me go from this general level of analysis and get down to specific cases. Let me first give you some numbers to show you that I'm not making up the problem I'm talking about.
Then it's time for us to lock in again, because he starts talking about government expenditures proportional to total government income. And then he says this.
The government publishes figures on the number of people who are regarded as being in poverty. Now, I warn you, that's a wholly arbitrary number. These levels that divide people between the not poor and the poor are arbitrary, but take them for what they are.
This guy makes me so angry. Yet again, I do agree with him here. The way that we calculate who's experiencing poverty is kind of broken and arbitrary, but he doesn't give any context. He doesn't explain why it's broken or how we can fix it together. He only brings it up so it can be like another piece of ammunition, throw it in the pile with broken government garbage. See how broken everything is? That metric at the time was a huge leap forward in understanding how, we understand who's experiencing poverty. It's basically if X amount is what it costs to have a nutritious diet, and a diet is like 1/3 of someone's total expenses throughout the month, then that number times 3 is the bare minimum line to be fulfilled. But it's not perfect, right? Because inflation impacted different sections of the economy very differently. And so, I would wager to guess, you, beautiful viewer, do you spend 1/3 of your monthly income on food? Probably not. It's usually a smaller portion of your monthly expenditures, meaning that the poverty line is much lower than what it actually should be. Okay, so then more fun with numbers. He talks about per capita income for the average American and compares it to a number that represents the total amount spent on welfare programs by the people who receive it.
If that $9,000 per person were really going to the poor, they'd be among the rich. That income given to them would put them in the top 20% of the income distribution.
He's trying to convert government welfare spending to individual income. And the welfare people have higher incomes. Oh no! This is dumb, right? Even if we are to assume that the numbers he provides are remotely accurate, the cost of welfare programs do not translate to direct income for people. And if that's the argument that he wants to have, that it should be that way, great. Like, that's worthy of a discussion, but that's not what he's saying. Like, it costs money to administer program. You have staff to organize documents and review eligibility. You also have direct support with case management. It depends on the program, right? But we can't be having this conversation if you don't bring those things up. To the average audience member who may or may not know these things, either way, they're taking a leap of faith in whatever garbage you say.
Let me get closer to home and go away from these numbers. Consider one of the major programs, which in a way is not really a social welfare program, but yet it illustrates the general point so beautifully that I can't resist referring to it. And moreover, it applies to you and me. I have in mind governmental expenditures in higher education.
In our quest to decipher what Friedman thinks the welfare state includes, now we know he doesn't think higher education is part of it, but apparently it's relevant enough, so now we're going to talk about that for a while.
You have a great deal of tax money being spent on higher education. Who benefits? Primarily the people who go to the institutions of higher education, the students. Where do they come from? They come disproportionately from the upper income classes. Even those of them who come from the lower income classes, as I myself did, are going to be converted by their college education in large part and by their own qualities into people in the upper income class.
If it hasn't been clear this whole time, this should make it obvious that his whole message is just anti-government spending on anything. For like the 10th time now, we start out agreeing on something. It's not good that the wealthy have more access to higher education. So increase access for other groups. I'm trying so hard to be like Milton. We see the same problems. I just wish, we could go a step further in trying to solve them instead of saying government bad. Because I don't think there's anything that inherently stops government from increasing access to higher education to other groups. It just hasn't been a priority. So let's make it one. Also, I think it's kind of lazy to just discredit poor people who did go to higher education by saying they were converted into being rich. Like, isn't the goal of higher education to increase economic opportunity? Isn't that what we want?
I think it's a good thing that everybody should have an opportunity to go to college, if he has the will, the capacity to do so, provided he's willing to pay for it himself. If he can't do it in advance, fine, let's set up mechanisms whereby we can finance him through college in return for a commitment on his part to pay it back later.
Just to close out this segment on education, just want to remind you that having students go into debt for education is a choice this country made. It does not have to be that way. Friedman then shifts to talking about Social Security, and you just gotta see this.
Now, Social Security is a case, as you may know, and it's one of the most extreme cases of misleading advertising that I know of. It's not social, and it's not security.
Hey, he did it! That one would be funny if it weren't stupid.
What it is a combination of a bad tax and a bad relief program, a bad distributive program. But let's leave that aside. I want to go to the point I'm talking about the tendency for us, and for those of us in the middle class. For those of us in the middle class.
I don't even know if this is worth talking about. The point he's trying to make is that Social Security is bad because the value for poor people is unequal, because they start working earlier and die sooner. Okay. How do you want to fix that structural issue, sir?
Calling on the government to solve problems strains that social fabric of agreement on basic values that is necessary to maintain a stable society.
And we're back to government bad. Lame argument. You know what calling on government to fix problems is? It's a society coming together and saying, hey, we all agree this thing is important, right? Taking care of each other, for example. And so we're telling government to do XYZ because we actually want to see that happen. We want to put rules in place or systems, programs, so that it actually occurs instead of just sitting by and hoping something happens.
Now, the great virtue of the market is that people who hate one another in other respects can cooperate with one another on the market without any difficulty.
Back to free market.
As I often say, when you buy bread at the grocery, you don't know whether the wheat from which that came was grown by a black or a white, an Indian or a Chinaman, Mohammedan, a Christian, a Jew, somebody you like, somebody you dislike. And it doesn't make a darn bit of difference. And even though you and he disagree violently on every issue, you can cooperate, he can produce the wheat and you can buy the bread. That's the great virtue of the market, that it permits cooperation.
See, I don't know if it's a value necessarily that you can agree with people just because they provide something to you. If we're talking about the basic values of a stable society, shouldn't that include recognizing the inherent value every member of the community provides? Anyway, he starts talking about why it's easier for government to do things in homogeneous societies. Eugenics dog whistle much? And he says welfare promotes regionalism and division in our society. Like, come on, man. You're going in circles here.
What can we do about it? Well, obviously, the right way to do it would be to get rid of these social welfare measures and promote our basic objectives by other means.
Wow, brilliant solution. Man, you are such a maverick. You are so smart. Wow.
There is a strong tendency to believe that you either must have the government do it, or else at the other end, you have only narrowly defined market activities with everybody looking after himself. That's wrong. There is a great middle ground. There is a great area in which you can have voluntary activity by individuals who cooperate with one another for common purposes.
Okay, so to recap, your two extremes are government and private sector. And the middle ground is just the private sector. Oh, wow. Wow. And his evidence is, well, look at the 1900s, before welfare. Charity was awesome.
The 19th century in the United States, when government spending never reached more than 10% of the national income and federal government spending never reached more than 3%, when we had essentially no welfare state measures on the federal level certainly and few on the state level, was the period, that 19th century was a period of the greatest outburst of eleemosynary charitable activity that the world has ever seen. The market is an effective means for voluntary contribution in promoting charitable activities as well as all other activities.
Charity doesn't change the material conditions of the everyday worker. Charity doesn't address the structural issues of wealth inequality that cause poverty in the first place. And let me be clear, obviously I'm not anti-charity. Charity is a good thing, has a very important role to play, but having the country's entire social support dependent on charity is a complete scam. Think about it this way. The wealthy are the ones giving, right? At least for the large-scale philanthropy he's talking about. They're thanked for doing something out of the kindness of their heart, it's seen as objectively a good thing. But what happens when that charity isn't enough to solve problems? If we, as a society, decided government were responsible, then we have the power to hold it accountable when it's broken. You can't do that with charity, so you're left with, ironically, the situation he decried at the beginning of this lecture, where elites who think they know better are the ones deciding what's best for people, what amount of help someone deserves, and who gets that help in the first place. I think this whole idea also counteracts a point he was trying to make earlier about everyone acting in their own self-interests in the free market. If going by that logic of pure economy, how is it in the corporation's best interest to donate to charity? You could argue that altruistic actions would improve their public image and bring in more customers, but what if they don't need any more customers? What if, like Amazon or Meta, they already have complete control? Answer me this, Milton.
One of the worst things, in my opinion, that has happened as a result of the welfare state is the destruction of private mechanisms. What we need to do is to strengthen those and use those instead of the compulsory mechanisms of the state. Thank you.
Oh. That's it? That's all you got? So from here, he moves into an audience Q&A, and I think it's best summarized by this moment right here.
Yes, sir.
Given that the best intentions of the government has failed to provide
The
adequate
government has
housing...
no intentions. Only people have intentions.
The best intentions among the people in power in government has failed to provide adequate housing for the poor.
Oh, go slowly. I never talked about the best intentions of the people in power in government. I talked about the good intentions of the people who promoted that legislation. Once you get legislation, the people who get in power in government are people who want power, not people who have good intentions.
Yeah.
That's a very different thing.
Though it's not really the question I had in mind.
Okay. We'll work our way around to it.
What I was hoping to ask is what specific policies you propose which would lead to adequate housing for all the poor.
Well, in the first place, you know, these are words that really have no clear meaning. Adequate housing for all the poor. Those are not definable words. What's adequate?
You know what he's trying to say, man. Stop deflecting. When he's challenged on his beliefs, he cuts people off, talks in circles, or jumps back to outdated prejudices. John Mulaney shows up and asks him about the Gilded Age as a counterpoint to the whole charity thing, to which Friedman incorrectly says robber baron John D. Rockefeller got his money the right way. Aha. Now, I finally get why he's been speaking in a black void. It's because his arguments only make sense when removed from the context of the known universe. Well, that was Milton Friedman. What do you think? Are you a fan? What was your favorite Fried moment? Personally, I admire how Friedman just wants to free men. As much as I disagree with probably every opinion he's ever had, I do really respect the archivists over at the Free to Choose network. They've made hundreds of hours of his talks and seminars and whatever available for free on YouTube. And even though I don't want, his ideas spreading necessarily, I do wish more people would follow that model. Anyway, this was a bit of a different video from me, a bit more casual, so I'd love to know what you thought about it. Thank you so much for making it this far, and if you liked it, what's coming next is this project I mentioned in the beginning looks at the history of welfare, how it's been effective or ineffective throughout history, and it's all done through the lens of this radical 90s abstinence-only campaign. Also, my history of welfare goes back farther than Milton did, so hope you're looking forward to it. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll catch you next time.